Okay, welcome to April 8th, Monday lecture. After a long series of lecture on Korea and modern contemporary Korea and so forth, now we are finally entering into one of the biggest nation on earth, China. Of course, next two lecture, today and the next week, two courses and two lectures on China is ridiculously short. I know that, we all know that China is a much bigger country to deal with, to be introduced. But, we are looking at more sort of historical side of East Asian conflict among themselves to some extent. And we also try to draw modern implications of historical heritage, historical foundation in East Asia, including China. So today, I will sort of outline traditional China and transition to modernization. So basically, 19th century, second half of 19th century history of China. And its struggle with Russia, its struggle with Japan, and how China's modernization came through. That's the topic we will share today. Okay, let me check if there is any chatting. Hello, everyone. The lecture will start soon. Oh, this is Mr. An's lecture note. Okay. So let me see if I can share part one. Am I sharing? Mr. An? No? Not sure. 오케이. 화면 공유를 먼저 하고 그다음에 내가 들어가서 traditional China. Am I sharing? Yeah. Sorry for the late opening today. I had some computer problem. Mr. Han safely resolved my problem. And that's why we spent a little bit, 10 minutes or 20 minutes to fix the computer problem. Now we are all set. So on economic history of modern China, part one, traditional economy begins. Okay. The traditional Chinese economy was characterized by its huge population, the size of which was almost double that of Europe. A lot of people are forgetting about the huge size of Chinese economy. It was almost the size of population, double that of Europe, believe it or not. Okay? So the higher population of China can be explained by the faster speed of the expansion of Chinese empire and its relatively higher rate of population growth. That means booming Chinese empire. If all the Chinese empire were not really making progress, there shouldn't be any population growth. So, for example, suppose there were several nations within China. And if each nation within China could not survive, could not support their population, remember, on those days, population itself is not only demand for production, but also supply of production. There are no other production means. Population themselves, they try to cultivate their farms, they produce something, they eat, they grow, and so forth. So when we see population growth, high rate of population growth means that economy is surviving, not only surviving, flourishing, making progress. Otherwise, they cannot afford newborn babies. They cannot feed them. They cannot make them to be part of production workers. So the higher population of China can be explained by the faster speed of the expansion of Chinese empire. So empire itself, themselves are expanding, were expanding, and it's relatively higher rate of population growth. Okay. So incentive to have more children was high in traditional China because of lack of social old age security and China's peculiar family lineage system with its associated ancestor worship. So, old age security means old people are taken care of by next generation, sons and daughters and grandchildren. And then there is a lineage system with its associated ancestor worship. The high birth rate was accompanied by a high death rate too, due to high infant mortality, female infanticide. You know what is female infanticide? In old Chinese days, if the newborn baby is a female, there are some incidents that they kill a female infanticide, and we call that as female infanticide. And the regularity of both natural and man-made disaster. As a result, the population growth rate was moderated to less than 0.5% per year on average. 0.5% per year on average, moderated because of high infant mortality rate. So this is very important. Moderated means what? It could be reaching it could be reaching 1% or 2%. But due to a lot of infant mortality, female infanticide, and things like that, natural disaster, man-made disaster, earthquake, on the average per year, 0.5% population growth. This is an important number to remember. And it should be it should be interpreted as a result, the population growth rate was moderated. Otherwise, it could have been in excess of 1%, 1.5%, but by natural disaster, infanticide, infant mortality rate, it got to be moderated less than 0.5% per year. Okay, so that is important. Nevertheless, population density was high, as the population was mainly concentrated in 5 regions along river. I think 5 regions are along the river. Yangtze River, which constitutes a small fraction of land in China, but accounted for almost 90% of total population. You see, these 5 regions along Yangtze River occupies 90% of total population. So it's very high density area along the river. Why? Because at that time, production capacity depended on water supply. If there is no water supply, farming could not be done. So along the Yangtze River, 90% of total population lived there and concentrated in 5 regions. This exceptionally high population density resulted in low labor productivity in agriculture. What is labor productivity in agriculture? Farm production divided by manpower. If there are too many manpower, farm production per person declines, low. At the same time, generated a large pool of surplus labor in the traditional economy. Okay, this is the very important keyword. Surplus labor means what? Unnecessary, redundant labor. Okay, unnecessary, redundant labor. There is a huge, large pool of labor which are not used. In the word of Arthur Lewis, Nobel claims that unlimited labor supply from surplus labor. And the unlimited labor supply. You have learned these keywords in Korean economy in the name of turning point. Around 1975. This turning point means in Korea, unlimited labor supply was ending. Around 1975. And after that, we continued to rise. In other words, the period in which unlimited labor supply ends, we call the turning point. But in case of China, the turning point did not reach. Continuously supply of unlimited labor supply. You see, that's the case. Okay, so in other words, where we found in Korean economy until 1975, Korean economy also had unlimited labor supply. Wage rate was not rising that rapidly. But as a consequence of 1960 to 1975 industrialization in South Korea, we have seen, manufacturing sector was approaching almost like 15% growth rate annually. So all the unlimited labor supply were absorbed the Korean economy. There were no longer unlimited labor supply. At that point, wage starts to rise. But according to this modern China theory, they did not reach Korea's turning point, that there was a continuous unlimited labor supply along Yangtze River. And the situation, China was not meeting any turning point. So let's take a look at some statistics, key statistics. This is over time China's history, population. And early Qing is modern, almost doubled from early Han area. And you see here, late Qing, this population continued to exist in China, Republic China, People's Republic China. And People's Republic China almost tripled by 2008. Explosive population growth. We can see from People's Republic 1950, just after World War II, and People's Republic 2008. And a very big jump in population under Mao regime and under Deng regime and so forth. Agriculture was the mainstay of China's traditional economy, and Chinese pre-modern economic history is simply the history of Chinese agriculture. One of the main reasons why traditional China outperformed its European counterparts, in terms of output. A lot of people are forgetting about this historical fact. Let me reiterate, outperform. traditional China outperformed its European counterparts in terms of output, agricultural output. At the time, there was nothing other than agricultural output, no manufacturing, nothing. Output per capita. What is output per capita? This is labor productivity. You see, was the superior performance of its agriculture. Why traditional China outperformed its European counterpart in output production? This was in turn due to its better technology, institutional arrangements, and favorable government policies. Oh, these are the very much technology and institutional setup. That is, Chinese government was well organized to support agricultural productivity increase. At times better than European counterparts. Okay. Chinese traditional agricultural performance reached its pinnacle best during the Song period and then stagnated thereafter. This is important. Why did they stagnate after Song? And they were falling behind, for example, behind Europe. After Song, China was falling behind Europe. Why? Because Europe was meeting with Industrial Revolution, China got stagnated because of the struggles among different power groups, among different nations. So the land-man ratio worsened due to rapid increase in population, whereas land productivity increased only slowly due to a lack of significant technical change. They didn't have any significant technical change. Land is fixed, population is growing, therefore land productivity increased only slowly, not fastly. The productivity increase was just sufficient to offset the decline of land-man ratio. And as a result, the output per capita remained constant over 500 years during the Ming and Qing periods. This is where China's problem existed. After Song, 500 years, there was nothing changed. Output per capita remained constant. Over the 500 years during the Ming and Qing periods, very stagnant, not growing. On the other hand, what happened to Europe? Europe went through, church revolution and also industrial revolution and Christian revolution. Europe went through many revolutions, increased output per capita. Did not remain constant for the next 500 years during the corresponding part of China's development. So that's where China started to fall behind Europe. There is some statistics. grain output performance in the Ming and Qing period. Population sharply increased, doubled. Cultivated land did not double. Therefore, land-demand ratio, cultivated land divided by population, declines. What does that mean? Per person equipped land diminishes, declines, shrinks. Grain yield is also, grain yield was improving, but output per capita almost stalemate, did not improve. Urbanization and traditional industry. Growth in cities in traditional China was constrained by the size of agricultural surplus available to feed the urban population, which in turn depended on agricultural productivity, peasants' consumption standard, and cost of transportation of agriculture to the city. Due to the primitive transport technology, traditional China's cities were concentrated along the Yangtze River, the southeast coast, to take advantage of cheap water transport. Yangtze River and southeast Guangdong area, southeast coast, Guangdong coast, sea coast area, to take advantage of the cheap water transport. So here is an interesting formula. The growth of cities is constrained by three factors on the supply side. Number one, peasants' productivity, peasants' consumption standard, the cost of transport of agricultural goods to the city. So what is these indicators? First, PU, urban population. P is total population. Okay. PA is farming population. So total population is composed farming population and urban population. So they call this is urbanization standard indicator. How many people, let's say 50 people live out of 100 population, urbanization is 50%. Okay, what is PA? Farming population, pure urban population. Average farmers consumption, CA. Average farmers consumption. So if average farmers consumption, self-consumption, on-farm consumption, if this is high, then makes the availability of that consumption in farming will be, if this goes up, in parentheses goes down, therefore urbanization is reduced. So the higher average farmers' consumption, urbanization trend will be reduced. What is Q divided by PA? Farmers' productivity. On the other hand, if farmers' productivity is big, if this denominator gets big, CA over denominator gets smaller, therefore more urbanization is likely. So please look at Q divided by PA is population farmer per person output level. Compared to that, if CA is very high, suppose they are producing 100, but previously CA was 20, now CA is 50, then the less is available to urban population. What is T? Transport efficiency indicator. If T is very high, then makes this whole thing small. So transport efficiency, percentage of food grain eaten by transport workers. Okay, if this is a very high, then makes 1 minus T very low. So transport efficiency indicator is very low. So the more percentage of food grain eaten by transport workers, less population urbanization is likely. So these are the hypotheses. So the growth of cities, urban cities, can be accelerated by lowering of farmers' consumption standard, CA, by increasing farmers' productivity, by lowering the cost of transportation. It's summarized. Two stages of urbanization in China. First phase, due to increased agricultural productivity and surplus, the rate of urbanization rose steadily from 4% in mid-Tang times to 6.5% in the middle of Ming period. Second phase, agricultural productivity in China stagnated, and so did the rate of urbanization. So first phase, due to increased agricultural productivity and surplus, the rate of urbanization rose steadily from 4% to 6.5%. Then came through very stagnant period. And that shows here urbanization trend, degree of urbanization. This is very interesting statistics. Let's concentrate around around 1500. China, degree of urbanization 6.5%. Number of cities 10,000 or more, 112. Average size of cities 44,000. How about Europe? Corresponding numbers are degree of urbanization slightly less than China. Number of cities slightly over than China. Average size of cities slightly less than China. But from 1650 to 1820, second half of the period, you can see here China degree of urbanization is deteriorating 5.9% from 6.8%. In Europe, increased from 8.3% to 10%. Number of cities, China stagnated, but European countries almost doubled. Average size of cities, China, very similar. average size of cities around 31, 34,000 in Europe. So traditional industry in China, there was a traditional cottage industry, household-based and small enterprise-based manufacturing and support service establishments, we call, was the second most important economic sector after agriculture. Second most important economic, cottage industry was this is very important remarks. Second most important economic sector after agriculture. Don't forget this statement. The relatively early and rapid development of handicraft industry is strongly related to the existence of labor surplus in China's agriculture. So in China's agriculture, there was labor surplus, particularly in the wintertime when there was no farming. Those labor surplus was put into handicraft industry. Okay. And very strong handicraft industry. Share of economic sectors in China's GDP, 1890, agricultural 69%, handicraft industry is 8%, trade is 8%. Isn't it interesting? So very strong handicraft industry. Share of economic sectors in China's GDP, 1890, the same. So traditional Chinese farms are family-based. Chinese peasants did not hire labor as subsistence wages. Subsistence wages means minimum wages at which one can support himself or herself. So it's minimum wage. And did not operate for the sake of making a profit. Any surplus was divided equally among family members. So family wages were kind of fixed cost. In order to maximize the surplus income above the fixed cost, traditional Chinese farmers tended to maximize their output subject to the constraints of their supply of labor. How can you describe? So this is a traditional industry, employment of labor in the traditional Chinese family farm. So what is total output labor? You can see this F curve is output curve. As you put more people, labor from L1, L2, total output increases. So you see this concave curve, diminishing returns. It's not proportionally increasing like this. It is concave. So marginal returns get smaller. As you put more people here, output marginally gets smaller. Okay. So you put here subsistence wage is a function of labor. So for example, suppose that you have $2 per day is required to live on Chinese farm. If 100 people L1, $2 times L1, which is 100, 200 will be subsistence wage. If L2 is 200, 200 times $2, 400 will be subsistence wage. Okay. So total output, you put 100 people, L1, and your total output was 300. Then getting 300 as revenue, pay 200 as subsistence labor wage. So the extra, this portion, you see here, this portion, this concave portion is profit. As you increase more labor, profit gets smaller. And if you ultimately reach L3, like this point, all the output is consumed on subsistence wage. No profit is available. So to have a profit maximized, let's say L1, at L1, this length becomes, profit becomes maximized. To do that, you put minimum subsistence labor L1, the rest of people you put cottage industry. Okay, so that you maximize output from cottage industry. So this is employment of labor in the traditional Chinese family farm. So which shows that at L1, this Chinese farm maximized profit. At L2, still profit is plus, but not maximized. Okay, so L2 minus L1 much people needs to work not on farm, but on cottage industry. Okay. So labor location in the traditional farm. This is a little bit too much economics. I don't know whether I explained this in mathematical terms. Well, if I have to do it, profit maximization comes like this. You maximize probability, price of agriculture and agricultural output. So agricultural output plus price of handmade times handmade output. All to the labor, problem of labor. All H is a function of labor. Okay. Subject to and PA subject to constraint is a PA. PH. is subject to some. So if you solve this profit maximization in the traditional economics way, then profit maximization here, marginal productivity of H A should be equal to H marginal productivity over H. Something like that. This is the first order condition we call to maximize profit. So if you put together, you have here, and this is this equation comes out here, this condition. So when profit is maximized, this condition prevails at L1. At L1, MPA is equal to PH, PA, MPH. You have MPA is equal to H divided by maximizing profit can be done at L1. So they use L1 labor farm. L2 minus L1 labor. This is a little bit too much of math, economics, mathematics. But if I explain, profit can be maximized at L1 because marginal productivity of agriculture is the same as marginal productivity of cottage industry, MPH, equalized here. So profit is maximized. So where do they put the rest of the labor? Labor supply from L2, L1, they put cottage industry. There were two phases of urban development in traditional China. During the first phase, due to increased agricultural productivity and surplus, the rate of urbanization was higher than that of Europe. In the second phase, due to stagnant Chinese agricultural productivity and the revolution of transport technology in Europe, Chinese rate of urbanization lagged behind that of Europe. This is very important conclusion. All of you should remember. Okay. Traditional industry was the second largest sector in China's traditional economy. It included traditional manufacturing, such as handicrafts and mining. The handicraft industry was highly developed and internationally renowned, owing to the existence of the large pool of surplus labor. Don't forget, this large pool of surplus labor in graph L2 minus L1. And a high degree of marketization in traditional society. Handicrafts were carried out as by employment, secondary or supplementary employment in agricultural areas, mainly in the individual household. The putting out system involving merchants and the establishment of workshop with hired labor was rare due to limited scale of production and degree of mechanization due to the availability of cheap surplus labor. Compared to agriculture, trade played a minimal role in China's traditional economy. It consisted of local market trade, regional long distance, and foreign trade. Trade in traditional China was highly developed, yet in spite of this, it did not lead to Smithian growth. What then means Smithian growth is a kind of a difficult concept, but it's kind of division of labor enlarges market and therefore it increases favor. So we call this Smith process, Smithian growth. What is Smithian growth? Suppose before Smithian growth, division of labor, suppose one household makes bakery, ship on and the clothing, and shoemaker. They do shoemaker, and in all one factory, cottage industry. Then of course the market size is limited. But due to division of labor, that factory makes bakery only. Okay, then large bakery making can enlarge market size. So if they keep just using division of labor, bakery only, then their bakery can be transported back to London area or remote area and enlarges market size, and therefore it increases trade volume. We call this Smithian growth due to the division of labor. So everything being produced within one country or within one household, if we divide our labor, division of labor, and concentrate on what we can do best by division of labor, then makes enlarged market size. The main reason for this was the limited development of long-distance trade. Okay. So foreign trade was banned in late traditional China, and most trade was confined to local trade, which was small in volume and involved in an exchange among peasants of their respective surplus products. The limited development of long-distance trade was partly due to the nature of the agrarian economy, under which the scope of vertical integration of the production process and hence specialization trade is limited. So volume of long-distance trade in China shows you mostly grain, cotton cloth occupies significant trade volume, long-distance trade. It was also due to the government's negative non-intervention policy toward business. The government failed to maintain a proper infrastructure for trade development. There was no uniform system of weights and measures, no sound monetary system, no national banking system, and no uniform taxation system. Worst of all, the government in traditional China had failed to provide an adequate institutional framework to support private contracts. So tax structure of Qing government, you can see land tax occupied about 73.5%. It became reduced by 1908, 35%. Because other means of taxes had increased. Land tax relatively getting smaller proportion. And on the basis of the openness of China's social structure, as evidenced by the selection of officials through the competitive examination system, China was not a feudal society, even though it had a well-defined status and socio-economic hierarchy, and the distribution of goods and services was by and large in accordance with the respective hierarchy ranks. So China's traditional social structure, the gentry, emperor, imperial nobility, and non-imperial nobility, almost like about 10, 12 classifications. Several reasons why industrialization is an absolute necessity for modern economic growth. A specialization limit to growth in the traditional agricultural economy, since Smithian growth is based on the division of labor, as I explained. A biological limitation to growth in an agrarian economy, which uses land as its main production factor. Once the land cannot be expanded, diminishing returns sets in, and the traditional economy stagnates. Malthus, Ricardo, Marx proposition. Then why China failed? China failed to industrialize, technological constraints. Though China had many gifted and inventive people, they did not embrace this path of inquiry, since the institutional framework in which they operated motivated them to compete successfully in the civil service exams and thus to emphasize the study of Confucian classics, not technology side. Confucian classics was dominating doctrine. Science in traditional China was always a subsidiary subject and was not valued in its own rights. The high-level equilibrium trap. The agricultural output in traditional China was near its pre-modern limit as a result of diminishing returns induced by the rising man-land ratio within the stagnant confines of traditional technology. Diminishing returns. High-level equilibrium trap. So what this equilibrium trap indicates, high-level equilibrium trap. You keep putting labor, total output is increasing E1, E2, E3, E4, E5 to catch up. But equilibrium is reached. It's like a trap. More people being put into labor, more output increased, but per person output is almost ending. So this is high level equilibrium. Why do we say high level? It reaches higher total output over time, but that becomes equilibrium. There is no surplus output. No surplus means high level equilibrium trap. So another reason is institutional failure. In late traditional China, the contracting institution was weak, and therefore self-enforcement and community-based enforcing mechanism were the domain form of contracting in economic and financial exchange. Though transaction costs were high, individuals could protect themselves against exploitation. Thus, a weak property rights institution must be one of the main culprits for lack of economic change in traditional China. Weak property rights institution, so provides no incentive to property right holders. Therefore, there is a very little incentive to develop further. Formally, China had a long tradition of property rights protection. However, the protection was ineffective. There was no independent judiciary, and local courts and judges or magistrates usually lacked legal competence and often were corrupt when judged from a modern perspective. You see, property rights protection is the most important incentive for institutional successfulness. Disputes often faced long delays, both in being dealt with in courts and in executing judgments. Thus, as a rule, costs were unreliable instruments of law enforcement and property rights protection. So there was a lack of incentive to put their property on hold, protected. Additional constraint, lack of entrepreneurship. Initiation of change ultimately lies with the entrepreneur, without whom economic growth does not work. China had many inventions, but not many entrepreneurs. This did not generate an expansion of the market or more specialization. According to McClellan, achievement motivation, entrepreneurial spirit, initiative, and risk-taking activities would be high if the level of culturally imbued need for achievement is generally high in society. But traditional China's dominant value system, which largely determined motivation, was confusion, not self-cultivation. It's not like Western type entrepreneurship, self-cultivation. It was more confusion-based. So there was a lack of entrepreneurship. Traditional Chinese society was divided into the ruling and the ruled class, with the former made up by the imperial family and the gentry elites. The gentry not only enjoyed prestige because of their education and power through office holding, but also possessed considerable wealth as a result of land holding and business activity. This wealth was well enhanced by their notorious rent-seeking activity, which could provide many times their official income. Here is the important wording here is rent-seeking activity. What is rent-seeking activity? It's not an easy concept to understand for all of you. But rent-seeking is kind of, it's like, if I read again, the gentry not only enjoyed prestige because of their education and power through office holding, but also possessed considerable wealth as a result of land holding and business activity. This is the source of rent seeking. This wealth was well enhanced by their notorious rent seeking activity, which could provide many times their official income. So what is rent seeking? Rent seeking is suppose you happen to own a land. Okay, of course, the return to land is rent. But by keeping land, you can have an access to capital gain. Land price next year doubled. Okay, then that doubled land price becomes rent, part of rent. So you tend to keep these land not only to get rental rate on your piece of land, but also rent seeking, capital gains. So these are the rent-seeking activities explanation. As a result, all effort went into the acquisition of Confucian education, and a lot of talent, time, resource was wasted on unsuccessful attempts to pursue elite status with its license for rent-seeking behavior. So this is the conclusion why China failed to industrialize. In other words, as we will learn to the experience of Japanese modernization, industrialization, China was falling on part of rent-seeking, Confucian education system, Confucian way of wasteful elite status system. On the other hand, Japan moved on to industrialize themselves, avoid Confucian rent-seeking behavior, more actively get into commercialization, trade urbanization, things like that. And that's why, while China failed one century from 1850 to 1950, Japan became superpower from 1850 to 1950, over one century. So one century struggle within China and within Japan and across Japan and China paved the way to develop East Asian nations. Maybe next chapter, we have to do it, I think next class. Traditional Chinese economic system to understand behind the China's economic system, particularly, the subsistence level of wage was kept on farms. At the same time, further excess supply, surplus labor was put into cottage industry to maximize profit. That kind of analysis was very important and very difficult to understand, but that's what it is. Okay. Okay, for today, I will stop sharing my PowerPoints, but I'll be answering to your questions. Okay, then let us continue China next week. We will move more turbulent period to transitional China and modern China. Okay. See you all. Huh? This unity of China affect its economy? Disunity of China. Disunity China affect its economy. Yes. China after Qing and is integrated in Republic China communist and communist China. We will learn. Okay. On this occasion, I want to thank you. Most of you have done a very good job in summarizing English articles. And I appreciate for your feedback. And I'm hoping though all those learnings, readings will help you ultimately your understanding of the topics. As you see, these topics are never easy to learn topics, but we can only learn from historical perspective, these topics. Thank you. 나가지마. Okay.